What's going on, y'all? So I wanted to make a bit of a different video from my usual sort of vlog style content, and I wanted to dive back into the world of Surron, specifically my 2022 Surron Light Bee X. There's been a lot of news coming out, a lot of videos and a lot of press on this new ERide Pro SS version 2, which looks like an amazing bike. So I wanted to go into some of the specifics of this bike, some of the pros, some of the cons, some of the things that I've loved owning it over about the past 2.5 years. And then also talk about this new ERide Pro SS version 2 that has been gaining a lot of traction, no pun intended, has been gaining a lot of traction in the sort of e-moto community as far as a alternative option to the Surron, just because it does come with a lot of features that I think a lot of people realize that this bike is lacking, unfortunately. And those features can be remedied. There is a wonderful aftermarket for this bike specifically. However, it costs quite a bit of money to get it to where most people want it, myself included. So I thought maybe giving a sort of breakdown on, my experience and what might make the ERide Pro worthwhile over this bike, just sort of break down the cost of ownership of this bike, some of the modifications that I've done to it, and hopefully help inform one or two people out there on, making a purchasing decision in between these two bikes that are both absolute beasts, but one might just suit your needs better than the other. Now, I want to start out by saying, these bikes, even though they're a few years old, I think the first ones came out in 2015, 2016, more than a few years, right? These are still amazing bikes to own. All things considered, what you get for the price tag is not all too terrible. And coming from somebody that has owned, motorcycles, larger bikes, 300 plus pounds, this bike is a fraction of the weight of that. And honestly, I think it's the most fun you can have on two wheels, this form factor specifically. Let me just say this, however, I'm not ashamed to admit that if the ERide Pro SS was out 2 years ago when I purchased this bike and did the power controller BAC 4000 swap, the battery, a bunch of other modifications, I think that decision would have been a lot easier. Just because the ERide Pro SS does have a lot of niceties that I think the average consumer wants that are in the market for this type of bike that the Surron simply doesn't have for only a small amount of money more than what this bike costs out of the box. So when we're just talking out of the box figures, and I think for a lot of people, they don't want to end up buying a $5,000 bike roughly and then putting another $5,000 into it, which is totally understandable. When you're just looking at the out of the box price of both bikes, the Surron X 2024, this bike, but updated, still comes in at $4,600. Alternatively, the ERide Pro SS comes in at $4,899. That's what you're getting out of the box, a roughly $300 difference, so really not too far off. So, right, let's say $4,600 versus $4,900. Now that we have that sort of baseline between these two bikes, as far as just the sheer cost of getting it to your house, what are the major differences here, right? What are the things that are gonna make you wanna choose one bike over the other? And I want to start off with talking about power, right? That's what I think most people care about, is how fast is this thing gonna go? How many butterflies is it gonna make me feel? And how shitted are my pants gonna be when I lay on the throttle, right? So this is where the greatest divide, I think, between these two bikes is, and the real reason why the ERide Pro SS is making such a massive footprint in this market already. Okay, so bone stock, right? The Surron Light Bee, and mine is not stock, granted, the Surron Light Bee comes with 6,000 watts or 6 kilowatts. This is great. This is a massive amount of power for a bike that weighs 110 pounds. A lot of fun, but if you're an experienced rider, like a lot of people out there, that power can just sort of feel like not enough, if that makes sense. The ERide Pro SS, on the other hand, comes out of the box with 12,000 watts or 12 kilowatts of power, respectively. That is a massive difference. In fact, it's twice as much power. Now, how that transfers in terms of the actual experience all depends on the rider's weight and the battery's charge level and a number of factors, but that is a massive jump. The battery itself on the Surron Light Bee, at least in the 2022 models, was a 38 amp hour. I think now it's a 40 or 42 amp hour, 60 volt battery, which would give you roughly 40 miles of range. The ERide Pro SS, on the other hand, comes with that whopping 12,000 watts being delivered through a 72 volt, 40 amp hour battery, which, even though that amp hours, and we could get into the specifics of all the electronics and what that means and how it transfers, 72 volts on a 40 amp hour battery is a wicked battery to have as far as just delivering raw power to the wheel. Alternatively, on the Surron, if you, like me, wanted to upgrade your power beyond 6,000 watts or 6 kilowatts, you have to replace the battery, you have to replace the controller. It's all a very very time-intensive thing, a great learning experience if you want to do that, but it's also very expensive monetarily, which is a big thing for a lot of people, myself included. I think if these bikes were going head-to-head back in 2022 on my sort of purchasing decision, that would have been a big deciding factor for me. 60 volts versus 72 volts can make a difference in a number of ways. However, on the ERide Pro SS with its bigger motor, when the tune is set that high out of the box, it just makes for a much wilder, you know, need a second pair of pants sort of experience than a Surron. A Surron is more forgiving off the line, and I say that, but when I got my bike and before I swapped out the power, my girlfriend hopped on it, jumped up a curb, thought things were going well, and then she just ran straight into a wall and flipped over the handlebars. She was good, wearing a full face helmet, as everyone should. So forgiving for a lot of people, some others maybe not. How that power is delivered, the 60 volt in the Surron versus the 72 volt in the ERide Pro are very different. You know, on my bike, I have a 60 volt, 52 amp hour battery, so quite a bit larger than the stock Surron 60 volt. However, it's able to deliver power at a higher rate than the stock battery through the BAC 4000 controller. Therefore, the tune on my bike currently is about 13,000 watts or 13 kilowatts. Now, to wake this bike up and get it to that level of power, I will note was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in more ways than one. Namely, this BAC 4000 controller was $663. The Egg Rider V2 display was $109. The BAC 4000 mount was $149. And this big old battery, you ready for it, was $2,300. Yeah. Now, I absolutely love this 52 amp hour battery. It provides a ton of range in my highest mode, just ripping around town as a 160 to 165 pound rider. Gives me roughly 50 to 60 miles, which is very nice, but yeah. $2,300. So all things considered, simply having a bike that comes out of the box with nearly the same power off the line as this bike here and not having to touch anything, that's a really nice thing to have. And it's a major point for the ERide Pro. Now, one thing I want to talk about with these bikes, and I think is a major reason what makes them so fun, is how small they are, right? Their size, their weight, they're so nimble. It feels like a mountain bike on steroids. Now, out of the box, these bikes are substantially different in terms of weight. The Surron Light Bee weighs in at only 110 pounds, whereas the ERide Pro SS comes in at a whopping 140 pounds. These are things to consider. That is a substantially different amount of weight on a bike that is already so small. You might think, oh, 30 pounds doesn't make a difference. You feel it, you really do feel it. When I upgraded this battery from the stock 38 amp hour to this 52 amp hour, it was quite a big noticeable difference in terms of weight and just the balance of the bike. Still fine, but notable. Some other notable differences too. The stock Surrons still come with KKE front forks. They're not terrible, but they're not designed for a bike this heavy. So if you are a larger rider, you're gonna feel just about every bump in the worst way. Whereas alternatively, the ERide Pro SS comes with beefed up front forks and a rear shock that is fully adjustable for the rider's weight based on the stiffness they prefer and that sort of thing. You can adjust the Surron rear shock, but only so much, and it doesn't feel like it makes that much of a difference. A lot of people end up swapping out the rear spring for a 600-pound spring if they are on the larger side. So with that, now I want to talk about wheels and tires. Both bikes come with these 19-inch front and rear tires. However, the tire on the ERide Pro SS in the rear is much thicker. The distance between where the axle connects on the rear swing arm on the ERide Pro SS is substantially larger, which can make a huge difference in terms of the tire that you can fit in the rear, which is a big thing for traction, especially if you're trying to convert this thing to an off-road e-dirt bike beast. Now, even though these bikes' tire compositions are fairly similar, I would deeply prefer the setup of the ERide Pro SS out of the box to this bike. I think even having these small sort of street knobby tires, just because they are a bit thicker on the ERide Pro SS, you can get away with riding off highway and off-road a lot more than you can with these bad boys. In fact, when I built out this bike, I knew I wanted to have a, acceptable level of on-road ability, but also have it be able to rip off-road, which leads us to our next point. Now, after doing all sorts of research, I had seen a couple different setups online that people tended to go with as far as aftermarket wheels and tires go. A popular one for the more sort of enduro riding, longer distances was a 21-inch wheel in front and the 19 same size in the rear with a slightly thicker knobby tire. Now, unfortunately, this setup, it seemed like the general consensus was that it sort of goes against the spirit of the bike, right? Something so small and nimble for what is essentially a pit bike in size does not need wheels that big. Not to mention that having wheels that large can kill your range just because of the rotational mass that is involved with keeping those things spinning versus a smaller wheel and tire. So what I ended up going with, and shout out to Moto Clops in Monument, Colorado, where I purchased virtually everything for this bike, was a 19-inch in the front and the 16-inch in the rear. This seems like the real sweet spot for this sort of small form factor of bike. So a custom dirt wheel set from Moto Clops in Colorado here, and that total cost came in at a whopping $1,127. So when you think about it, of course, that's not a need. That's not something everyone needs. A lot of people ride these bikes on the street exclusively, but that is a major cost on top of our already expensive bike, plus the battery, plus the power controller, and then you're dropping another $1,200. What comprised that cost was the custom rear wheel, the rear tire, the heavy duty tube, the titanium rim lock. Because this bike is pushing 13,000 watts, you need a rim lock or you'll rip the bead off of the actual tube inside of the tire. I also got a Kenda Washigul 2 for the front to match the Kenda Ibex in the back. As far as tires go, they're very soft rubber, very off-road enduro knobby tires. Add a Warp 9 titanium rim lock to the front, another tube, an extra Galfer rear rotor, another Surron brake disc, a frictionless, O-ringless heavy-duty chain for the added circumference of the rear sprocket on the dirt setup, an NTC rear rotor guard, Warp 9 52 tooth sprocket over the stock 38 tooth sprocket, or is it 34? And then finally, a Warp 9 0.75-inch rear linkage riser, which just lifts the bike up a little bit to compensate for it sitting lower due to the 16-inch tire versus the stock 19-inch tire. Now keep in mind, I think that the ERide Pro SS and the Surron have fairly similar wheel and tire setups, but the ERide Pro SS is just because of the width of the rear tire and the ability to upgrade it from there because of the width of the rear swing arm is objectively better. Now, is it so much better that I wouldn't have looked into aftermarket wheel and tire options with the Surron? I don't know. But I think it might have been just good enough for me to get by with the occasional off-road riding I do and not have to worry about it with those tires. But with this bike, these tires, I knew right away were not gonna be good enough for off-road riding specifically. Now finally, a few quality of life differences between the Surron and the ERide Pro SS. For one, this is an aftermarket screen. This is the Egg Rider that you need to pair to this BAC 4000 controller. The stock screen you can see online are very cheap, small, and you can't actually see a lot of what's going on. They just really tell you the speed, they don't even tell you the battery. On the ERide Pro SS, you have this nice LCD display in the center. I'll pull up some pictures of it. That is a lot more information and just generally looks a lot nicer. On top of that, the USB on this bike is just a USB, I think 2.0, 5 volt. On the ERide Pro SS, you have a 5 volt USB and a USB Type-C plug, which is just nice. So as much as I hate to say it, what are you really getting for this bike that justifies only spending $300 less versus the ERide Pro SS? The ERide Pro has a top speed out of the box of 60 miles per hour and a range of 50 miles. The Surron has a top speed of 50 miles per hour and a range of 40 miles. Those two things alone are pretty substantial, not even considering all the things with the tires and the suspension and the screen and the just sheer 72 volts of power to make you consider the ERide Pro. And just having a substantially better front fork on the ERide Pro versus this bike is a huge quality of life improvement. This thing is not great and it starts to wear on you when you take it off-road and realize just how shocking it is. Now, I am confident that my bike in its current configuration would smoke a ERide Pro SS. However, when you total up the cost of all of the modifications I've done to this bike, from little things like the handlebars and the grips to big things like the power controller and the battery, this bike costed me $9,638. Now, to get the customization abilities of a Surron and the flexibility there, those are nice things, but is it really worth the cost of virtually 2 Surrons? I don't think so. So closing thoughts, if you are on the fence between these two bikes, yes, I'm sure still the Surron offers a much wider array of aftermarket parts, but because the ERide Pro SS is such an attractive option, I don't expect it to take that much time for them to absolutely catch up to what this bike can offer in the aftermarket sort of customization world, and for the prices of that to drop down. I just can't in good conscience recommend this bike over the ERide Pro SS when virtually everything except for just the weight of the bikes, which when you factor in all the other options doesn't matter that much, when everything on the Surron Light Bee X is objectively worse than what comes out of the box on the ERide Pro SS. Do I still love this thing? Yes. Does it make me sad that I spent almost $10,000 for what is comparably now the same as an ERide Pro SS? Kind of. But I don't think that that is a bad thing for the consumer in general, right? Surron was the top dog. They were the only ones doing this for almost 5 years. And then Talaria came around and offered a attractive option for something that had a actual gearbox, but a lot of people didn't like because of its added weight. My point is that competition in this market is good for us, the consumer. So having something come in that has such just wildly powerful, out of the box and comfortable options for almost the same price as a Surron could make Surron wake up. We'll see what their next, 2025 Light Bee looks like, and we'll see what their 2026. I think having real competition in the market for them will be a wake-up call of what they can do to make these bikes even better and keep the price down. Oh, and I just remembered the ERide comes with better pegs and a way better headlight. I give up.